Okay, everybody, so let's talk a little bit more about our specific immunity. So with our specific immunity, we can also call that our acquired immunity because you have to kind of train it. And so with your specific immunity, you can set it up basically two ways. You can set it up in a way that it is passive or a way that is active. So if you're looking at passive immunity, you're dealing with getting the antibodies. So in passive, think of it as somebody's gifting you antibodies. So here with an antibody, this is a basic looking one, on this end you have a variable segment. So this can attach to foreign pathogens and do a variety of things that we'll talk about in a different video. But basically they work right away. So with passive immunity, it works right away. Downside, they're giving you the antibodies, not the means to make them yourself. So this is a kind of the whole analogy of teach a man to fish, he can live forever because he can then kind of fend for himself versus give a man a fish, he'll eat that day. So you give them the antibodies, they're immune that day. They're immune right away, but they don't develop the memory to make them themselves later. Versus active, what you're going to get is the antigen. And that antigen could cause illness, or it could just be an inactive antigen. Depends on your source. But in both cases, with getting the antigen, your body is going to make memory cells. It's going to make these cells that will turn into factories later that then you can spit out a whole bunch of antibodies and be really effective then. Downside is you have to make the factories. So in the case of active, there is this window of time where you're just not effective against it yet. And so let's talk about the two different ways under active that you can set this up. So there's naturally acquired active immunity. With this one, you're running across the antigen in a natural way. This is basically just getting sick. So in my world, this is when my son picks his nose and then comes and gives me a hug. So with our natural exposure to antigens in the environment, sometimes we're just going to get sick, but we're not going to get sick with the same thing again. This is why actually back in the day, they used to do chickenpox parties. Like one person would get chickenpox. They would say, okay, let's call all the friends over and have a sleepover to expose them to the antigen. Then they're just, planning when people are sick. So in this case, you're going to get exposed to it. You're going to have this window of time while your body's making the factories to fight off the infection that you're actually going to be sick. You're going to utilize a lot of your innate or non-specific immunity to help fight it off while you're waiting to get antibodies to a level that they can then defend yourselves. But then you have those memory cells, those factories for future infections that you won't get sick with the exact same pathogen again. That's different than artificially acquiring it. With artificial, think of something that comes from a needle or a syringe. So you're getting it maybe in a doctor's office, at a pharmacy. And so in this case, again, remember you're getting antigen, but it's an inactive form of the antigen. So instead of giving you the full pathogen, they give you a piece of the pathogen. So you can teach the body to recognize that little protein structure. And so not going to trigger illness here because there's not actually the rest of the pathogen to cause you to become sick. But again, your body is going to develop the factories to help make a bunch of antibodies so you can't get sick with that antigen if you did run across it naturally in the environment. All right, if we come back to passive, we have the same setup here. We can passively get things in a natural way. So a natural way to directly get antibodies would be like directly from mom. So it could pass through the placenta or through breast milk. So again, part of natural life, but you're not giving them the factories to be effective in the future. So baby's not going to get sick right away while they're breastfeeding. They have some natural immunity handed off from mom. But then after breastfeeding ends, they're going to have to make things kind of more this way, where they're going to either get a vaccination or run across the pathogen to make the factory. So they can be immune to it long term. So remember, with passive, effective immediately, but not long term. There is a way and a time when it's useful to have things given, these antibodies given in an artificial way. So with artificially acquired passive immunity, you're getting antibodies. It works right away. Again, you're not making memory for it. But again, think of artificial, think of something that's going to be injected through a syringe or a needle. Why would we ever need this? Something where you're getting the antibodies that works right away? Well, what if you're bitten by something that's poisonous? So an antivenom is something that you would use there. You're giving the person the antibodies to fight off or defend against that attacking toxin that's in that venom. So it works right away. And I think the goal is that you've learned your lesson and you're not going to play with that snake anymore. And so that you won't need the long-term memory for it. So it'll work right away. Make sure you don't die from that particular bite, but then not going to stick around long-term. So these are your 4 ways that you can get your specific or acquired immunity set up in your body to defend against future pathogens or be effective right away. That snake anymore, and so that you won't need the long-term memory for it. So it'll work right away. Make sure you don't die from that particular bite, but then not going to stick around long-term. So these are your 4 ways that you can get your specific or acquired immunity set up in your body to defend against future pathogens or be effective right away.